thanks so much for chatting with us today. Let's just talk about a little bit about what your main message is at IONS this year, 2019, compared to when you know, where we were 2-3 years ago.
I don't know that I have a main message today. The message, there are many messages. That's the problem, for me at least. I mean, there are our 5 pillars at IONS, which are ways of thinking about the efforts, the energy that we're directing in different ways. So the part of that I'm most involved with is called IONS X, which is our, every entity eventually at some point has a Project X, which is our placeholder for we don't know what to call it yet.
Okay, nice.
But the intention of IONS X is to finesse the scientific controversy over the capacities of consciousness by showing that it can do something useful. So most of what we do is laboratory-based research. We show that there are interesting effects, but from a scientific perspective, they're still considered very controversial because we can't show something again and again exactly the same way. But what we might be able to do, and this is the goal then of Project X, is to do a demonstration project to create a technology which is based on consciousness. So what's popular now, you see this all over Silicon Valley, are people making telepathy machines, by which they mean brain-computer interface. And so Facebook is doing it, and Elon Musk is doing it. They're creating these telepathic interfaces, but it really means just reading brain stuff. So we're doing something similar to that, except that it has nothing to do with the brain, or at least it's not directly connected to the brain. We're looking at consciousness itself from a distance, influencing machinery of various kinds, technologies.
And one of the examples was what you're doing with dogs, right?
With dogs.
With animals?
No, we're not doing anything with
Nothing
animals.
with animals,
No.
okay. Okay.
No. What we are using is a plasma ball as one example.
Plasma ball, yes.
Yeah, so a plasma ball is interesting because it's not very expensive. It looks like a dynamic living thing because of the direction of the electrical streamers are going all over the place. And that makes it very, very sensitive to electric fields, to external electric fields. So we figured, okay, let's use that as a target for mind-matter interaction, direct interaction. And typically in an experiment, it means that I'm looking at the streamers and I'm given the instructions to make the streamers tend to go to the right, or go to the left, or go up, or do something. And then there are periods where you don't have that intention. And we compare what's happening in the ball with the intentional direction versus not. So
And how large is that sampling for the intention?
Well, it might be 30 seconds at a time over a course of 20 minutes. So 30 seconds, there will be 30 pairs of interactions with the system, or 20 pairs for 20 minutes. And then maybe we'll do 30 or 40 sessions with the same people or sometimes different people. So we get a lot of data there. You generally need a lot of data in order to be able to see these effects. But in our most recent study, we've had the plasma ball inside our electromagnetically shielded room, all by itself, being watched by a webcam. Otherwise, it was completely dark in the room. So the webcam got a really good picture of the dynamic movement of the electrical streamers. And then on the outside of the shielded room, the image was brought by a fiber optic cable into a PC, and so the subject in the experiment could see the ball, and they could also see a line being drawn of the amount of illumination that was appearing in a specific portion of the ball. So if your task was to mentally make the streamers go to the right, then the line that was moving would be how much illumination there was on the right side. So you could either look at the ball, or you could look at the light and try to make the line go up, which would mean that you were being successful in pushing the streamers to the right. So because the ball is so well shielded, there shouldn't be any way that anybody can interact with the ball, in any conventional way, except that's what we get, that there is an interaction. And again, it took 30 sessions of 20 minutes each with lots of intending and not intending to get that effect, but the final results are pretty strong, showing that the intention actually does change the direction that the plasma goes.
And who are you showing these studies to sort of get the bar to the next level in terms of, the credibility and how this has implications for people in their everyday lives, for better understanding consciousness.
Well, eventually these experiments will be published in peer-reviewed journals. So that's our primary way of getting it out. We may also write a popular version of what the experiment is about on the website or maybe in a magazine. In terms of the implications of it, first of all, we need to figure out that the effects that we're seeing are causal, that the mind is causing this to happen. If we can do that, and you can show that experimentally that that is what's happening, the implication is that our minds are a lot more powerful than we're taught. That you're literally changing aspects of the physical world
Through attention.
Directly through your intention.
Yeah. So I'm sure you're writing a lot about this as this example and study as well as others in your book, Real Magic.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about what you mean by real magic and why you came up with that title?
So real magic is not Harry Potter magic. That's fictional.
Oh, darn.
Yeah. And it's not Harry Houdini magic. That's also fictional. It's not magic toothpaste and it's not magic shampoo. Those are used as adjectives to indicate an amazement. But it's kind of like all of that in the sense that we're talking about something that doesn't have another name yet. And the phenomena all have to do with the capacities of consciousness. So it falls into three categories of real magic. One is, like in this experiment, that your mind can interact with the physical world in some way. So in the esoteric tradition, that would be called something like force of will. Your will can be impressed upon the world. That's what
manifestation, the secret,
yes.
all of that.
Affirmation. That's the traditional way of thinking about magic spells and so on. The second category, though, of real magic is divination. So divination in the popular sense is crystal ball gazing and the use of the tarot and the runes and all of that. They're all methods of focusing the mind on things yet to come, either in time or space. So divination actually could also be about clairvoyance in real time. And then the third category is called theurgy, which is about interacting with spirits. So non-visible typically, non-human typically.
Well, non-visual to the human eye in this,
yes.
in this linear world.
Well, and some people can see these things.
Yes.
And so the idea is that there's some kind of something out there, intelligence, that you can interact with. So that's the third category of magic, which from a scientific perspective is studied primarily through things like mediumship and channeling and near-death experiences and that sort of thing. So in each category, the reason why I carve it up into those three pieces is that science has addressed the issue of force of will magic. We see that in the laboratory. They're not gigantic effects. We don't see people levitating, but we see things that can be measured.
Well, and remote viewing. It's certainly been done for a long time.
That fits into divination.
Yeah. So
divination is about studies of clairvoyance and precognition, primarily. And as I said, theurgy is studies of mediumship and that sort of thing. So even though you have three categories of esoteric magic, which are normally set aside as ancient beliefs, in fact, for over 100 years now, science has been looking at these kinds of practices and finding that there actually is some scientific evidence that they weren't stories, that they're real things. So hence real magic.
Well, this kind of plays into materialism, doesn't it? And the sense that is the mind part of the human body, or does it live in the cloud, if you like, which is where universal consciousness lives?
Well, it's probably both. It's a little of both. So, or maybe a lot of both. It's both and to some degree. So yes, the brain is clearly involved in the way that we perceive ourselves and our behavior and a bunch of other stuff. That's why the neurosciences are so successful. On the other hand, it doesn't account for, they're like you as your brain does not account for things like telepathy and clairvoyance and precognition. At least it doesn't account for it very easily. You can start doing hand-waving models. These are these models where we're talking about quantum waves and something like that, which might be a viable explanation, but we're still pretty far from it, from being viable. So my guess is that materialism alone, as the absolute way of thinking about reality, is not going to be sufficient.
No, not anymore.
No.
And finally, it seems like we're coming to a place where people from the scientific world are starting to quietly but embrace this And quantum physics obviously took us to the, right? This is the closest we've gotten to in the material world, if you like, to understanding this as human beings.
Right, but when I talk about quantum mechanics, people want to make typically a leap that quantum mechanics is explaining a phenomena, and it doesn't really. So I said instead, I'm pointing in the direction of from classical to quantum mechanics. There's a direction that's being pointed, and so don't look at my hand. Look where I'm pointing. The direction that physics is taking as we get deeper and deeper into the nature of reality is becoming more and more compatible with the esoteric view. So we're not there yet. At some point they will converge, and then we'll say, oh, okay, this is that. But we're not there. We can say that we're pointing in the same direction.
So let me ask you this question, because we live in the world where, you know, we deal with channelers and energy healing all the time in our world where we live and we're in. You know, we're fairly close to you guys.
Mm-hmm.
And what can this esoteric world of channelers and energy healers and Reiki practitioners and people who are seeing these miracles happen every day, what can these practitioners do to help move this along and garner some respect from the scientific world? I mean, obviously we've got the studies, that's what they look for. They want the proof, they want, you know, they want X percentage of proof across all of these studies, but are there other things that can be done from the other side to help move things along?
The currency of truth in the secular world today is science. So the other side of it, though, is pragmatics. Of the various types of therapies that people are using, especially Reiki, there have been meta-analyses that show that Reiki does something. Well, that's showing there's a pragmatic value to it, independent of knowing how it works. So that is one direction, where if you show that any method is pragmatically useful, well then that's good, that's a step in the right direction. And then you take the scientific side as well, where we try to figure out, first of all, can we show it under controlled conditions? Sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. And if you can we figure out the process to create a model, which may be materialistic or a quasi-materialistic or something else, but some kind of model that will help us explain why it is working. And for a model to be a good model, it would require a way for us to test whether or not it's correct. So there are a lot of theories about this, the whole other dimension that we're talking about. Many of them are not testable. And so that's a core element of the scientific method, is that you could have a great theory, but if we can't figure out a way of telling whether it's true or not, then it's just a story.
You know, I love what you guys are doing at IONS, though, because your attempt year after year is you're bringing these voices together. The spiritualists, right, the esoteric ancient world from Asia flies over to, you know, the Bay Area once a year, and we meet all under one roof to have this conversation. And where do you see IONS next year and the year after? Do you think that more of the esoteric ancient wisdom is going to come into the room with the scientists to, you know, to have these dialogues and to shift things?
Well, I think we're on an upward trend. There are fads and fashions in science and society and everywhere else. 30 years ago, it would have been hard-pressed to find a conference on consciousness. Today, they're all over the place. Right. Every weekend, every side street has a conference on consciousness. So that is a very positive trend, because it means a dialogue is happening.
Yes.
We experience that at IONS because most of the scientists on the staff are invited around the world all the time. We would be on the road all the time, all of us, if we accepted all of these invitations. Well, that's also a very good sign, because now there's a reaching out from what used to be considered only spiritual communities who want to hear about the science and collaborate in some way. And also even among scientists who have always experienced things that will be called spiritual, but learn not to talk about it.
Right.
Well, now they're saying, oh, okay, maybe I can talk about it a little bit.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So it's coming from both ends.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.